I'm going to jump to Daniel chapter 7. And what we are doing this fall is we are focusing on one of the sort of neglected metaphors in the Bible that helps us to describe our human experience. And the metaphor is of feeling like exiles. Now, what is an exile? An exile is a person who has been born in one society, one place, maybe one culture, and then has been moved by life circumstances or foreign policy or migration, however that it comes to be, they have been moved to a different environment. And a lot of time exiles feel this sense of not knowing if we are totally at home somewhere. This is the experience of this person named Daniel, who is the author of this book. And Daniel's experience is all about how he deals with the aftermath of being taken at probably around 15 years old, 900 miles away from his parents, his culture, his family, his religious upbringing, and made to live in a very different environment. And so Daniel, his whole life story is about being an exile and of longing, wanting to return home. Some of you guys didn't get these. I handed out some of these compasses last week, as I mentioned, some of which even point north, right? And I gave one of these to my kid, but we ran out last week because so many people took them. And I've got them in the lobby again today. We can kind of take these compasses to remind us that we are seeking God's direction in our lives. That's what Daniel is about. It's about feeling that there is a home somewhere out there for us that we are not in right now. We are living away from home and our hearts are drawn to something. As the theologian Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. That is the experience of exile. All of us, regardless of your passport, regardless of which country you were born in, all of us have this experience of feeling that we are not fully at home yet in the world. And so Daniel is someone who has this life story. He's been raised in exile. He's an older man, and at the very middle of the book of Daniel is what I've had you turn to, Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, this book of the Bible becomes very strange in that the whole book to this point has been written from the third person. That's the narrator's point of view, bless you. And it's been written as a description of, Daniel did this, and then Meshach and Abednego did this, and King Nebuchadnezzar did this. And all of a sudden, Daniel begins to write as if it's a journal entry. He's writing in first person. So this is Daniel's experience of a part of the Bible that gets very strange. Because we learn at the beginning of Daniel chapter 7 that he goes to bed one night and visions from God begin to come into his mind. And it gets very, very strange. He begins... most interpreters would say to get a vision of all of these strange animals are coming in, and there's winds, and there's all this sensory overload that he is trying to interpret as God sort of showing him things that are yet to come. Okay? That is a strange part of the book of Daniel that we're in. And you can look into this, and many people have predicted the end of the world through this and exactly when that's going to happen. I do not have that for you today, but we do have something pretty good. In the midst of this vision, and why we're turning here to the very heart of the book of Daniel and doing so is because Daniel gets a vision of something that shows him Jesus. And that is what I want for all of us today. To get to see Daniel seeing Jesus. Because this part of the Bible, the very parts of the Bible in our English translations or other translations in the room that you are reading, this is a part of the Bible that Jesus at the end of his life, when he was being sentenced and put on a cross, Jesus quotes some of the verses that we are about to read as central to his understanding of his life's work and mission. Do you understand me? In other words, this part of the Bible is an important part of the Bible to Jesus. He had it highlighted and memorized. So when he is facing down the cross, he quotes this and says, if you want to know who I am and what I'm about, it's these verses. Now, they're very strange. I won't play around with you. They're very strange, but let's read them together. I'm going to jump up into the middle of this vision in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. As I looked, Daniel begins to describe what he's seen. He says this, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Now, if you've ever been in churches on any other Sunday mornings, you will often hear in our worship songs, we will sing about the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days is a reference to who? God, right? It's generally a reference to God. The Ancient of Days is like the one before all days began. In other words, it's God. We kind of picture this sort of figure with a big, long, white beard. So Daniel gets a vision of God. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and his hair, the hair of his head was white like wool. Okay, very ancient figure. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. Now, let me just point something out. It's interesting that Daniel, as someone who has experienced exile, describes God sitting on a throne. But notice this, the throne is moving. Now, why is this significant? Daniel's signature event of his life was at 15 years old being deported and taken 900 miles away, and then trying to figure out if God was mobile enough and his presence would go with him. Here Daniel's granted a vision where he realizes that God's throne is on wheels, meaning what? That God is moving in the world with his people. You understand? Continuing on. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch let me skip this part. You can get back to it at a different time. We'll go to verse 13. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me, here's the payoff, was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority and glory and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. This is a description of the Son of Man. Now, when Jesus came to earth, a lot of people had different names for him. Jesus was called a friend of sinners. Jesus was called a blasphemous person by some. Some were not names that were necessarily friendly. Other people called him Master or Lord or the Messiah. But for Jesus himself, the number one code name, nickname that he nicknamed himself was he described himself as the Son of Man. Now, let me explain this to you. Son of Man, it's one part of this is we see Jesus just showing that he truly is human, that he's one of us, right? He's saying, I'm a son of man. In other words, I am human. In other words, he has something in common with all of us. But Jesus is brilliant and knows his Bible. And it sure seems that when Jesus is talking about himself being not a son of man, but the Son of Man, that he has in mind that he is someone unlike any other. And Jesus proceeds during his ministry, there would be times when he is describing his work in the world and he would say things like this. He would say, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost, Luke 19:10. Or he would say things like this, for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Do you see what Jesus is doing? Jesus is talking about himself and cluing people into saying, look, I'm coming into the world acting as this Son of Man figure. And then it finally reaches a point where you don't have to just guess that I'm putting together Bible verses or something like that. When Jesus is on trial in front of the religious leaders, he cites these verses from Daniel when they ask him, are you the Messiah? And he says, in Mark's gospel, he says this, I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. In other words, Jesus is saying, all of this stuff in the prophets, all of this stuff in the first half of the Bible, Jesus is saying, I am the fulfillment of all of that. So when we look at this figure of the Son of Man, what do we see is true about him? Well, one of the things that grips me from Daniel's vision is that Daniel sees that there are people from every tongue and nation gathered around him and worshiping him. We see that this figure, the Son of Man, has an intimate connection with the Ancient of Days. We, in the Christian world, we would say this as God the Father and God the Son in this intimate relationship that we see depicted in this vision. Here's why I think it's so important that we just stop even in this part of the church year where I'm so excited for you to see all of the stories in Daniel and things like that, is to see this. Even in the book of Daniel, hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, we see Jesus. Do you understand? And the purpose of you guys coming to church on a Sunday morning is not to sing a certain song or to hear a certain person or a certain voice or even to bring your kids to a great program. The purpose of us gathering together here and why we believe that we have something on any given Sunday morning for anyone from any nation or language is because we are about Jesus. So our goal here is to see Jesus. Daniel is experiencing profound exile, isolation, cultural pressures. Today they did research just earlier this year. They interviewed 1,500 13 to 18-year-old kids. And the way that they decided to try and check in on a generation of 13 to 18-year-olds was their survey question was, how much pressure do you feel around this? And then they described it. They said a little pressure, a lot of pressure, very much pressure, like whatever the survey is, you see. But the number one thing that they think to check in on the well-being of a generation is to check in on how much pressure they feel about different things. Things like what, Pastor Brad? Things like this. Do I have a good future in store for me? 78% of kids say they feel pressure around answering that question. 4 out of 5 at our high school or middle school are wondering, is there going to be a good future for me? Is what I'm learning in school going to help me in the future? There are other questions. Questions like, how much pressure do you feel to know if you belong? And again, the vast majority of students say, yeah, I feel pressure around that. Exile, living in a place where we experience pressure in life where we are not fully at home, not fully in the world as God wants it to be, it comes with pressure. Worries about the future. Worries that some of these kids are picking up from the adults in their lives, our own pressures that our kids are picking up on. When they come home and they realize we feel pressure around finance, we feel pressure around political instability, we feel pressure around all these things. Daniel had felt all of these pressures, but in the midst of all of them, he goes to bed one night and he says he's troubled. He's troubled in his sleep as God is bringing him these visions, but in the middle of these visions, he's given a picture of Jesus who is to come. In the midst of our pressures, what we want for our students and for ourselves and for our church is that we have a clear and compelling vision of Jesus. That we say, I don't know where exactly our country is going. I don't know exactly where the economy is going. I don't know exactly where the local school board is going to invest. I don't know where my industry is going, but we say, when we don't know what to do and feel pressure, we look to Jesus. So, my hope for all of us as we enter into this season, and we'll continue to piece together the book of Daniel and see what he's saying, but my hope for you is this, that in all of life's pressures, whether you're feeling pressure around something, and Candace mentioned it in her testimony, or whether you're feeling something around pressure and it's something that you raise your hand for Brother Glenn to pray for, or whether you're feeling something about pressure that you're worried about the kid that you dropped off today, or the kid you have in school, or the kid that will be nowhere near a church this morning but that you're worried about. My prayer for all of you is that in all life's pressures, you would get a clear and compelling vision of Jesus. That you would see the Son of Man, who is both like us, human, became like us, but totally different than us. The church teaches this, that God became like us so that we can be like God, that we can return into right relationship with God. So, all I have for you this morning is this. The answer to the pressure that you are feeling is not going to come through you avoiding the situation. It's not going to come through you seeking pleasure. It's not going to come through you seeking your own preferences. The only solution that the Bible holds up for all of us in life's pressures when we feel we're not at home, when we wonder how it is that we're going to end our lives, like where are we going to be and who's going to be with us and what that's going to be, the answer the Bible gives is this. You don't know exactly what's going on, but you can look to Jesus and he does. So may God open our eyes, that we would see the Ancient of Days, God in all of his glory. And that we would see Jesus and we would say, wow, the Son of God that God had planned for us to meet from this part of the Bible All the way later is when God is bringing this person into view. But all along, God knew that his son was coming. And that same Savior is working in the world today. And Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. So if you are lost today, know the whole reason that the book of Daniel, the very heart of it is this, that God is sending someone to pull you out of a feeling of exile and to walk with you through life and to bring you home. And that person is the Son of Man, and his name is Jesus.